You're listening to Grain of Salt, a podcast hosted by Donnie Burtles and Christa covering the Buffalo and Niagara region's food and drink scene. Today's episode features Christa speaking with Buffalo proper's Jon Karel and expat Jason LoGrasso. Karel, credited with being a pioneer in Buffalo's cocktail movement, found mentorship in San Francisco bartender LoGrasso during the early part of his cocktail career. Listen to the friends and barkeeps tell the story of how they met, how the local scene measures up to San Francisco's, and share tips on how to discern a real craft cocktail bar from a phony one.
Welcome to Grain of Salt. I'm Christa, and my pal Donnie Burtles isn't here with us this evening. In his place, I have two great guests. I have Jon Karel from Buffalo proper and from many other amazing things we'll talk about.
Hey there, Christa. How you doing?
Hi, doll. And Jason LoGrasso, who is actually a Buffalo native, but has been in San Francisco and elsewhere tending bar for several years. And say hi, Jason.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Good to be home and good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. So Grain of Salt is really about trying to sort of expose what's happening on the food and drink scene here in Western New York. And I think, for me personally, what I find most fascinating about food and drink in any capacity is sort of the anthropological history of how something came about. And we've talked about that before, Jon. You know, that's like my thing.
I love it, yeah.
And that's sort of what we're doing here today with a very short-term sort of history lesson. I want to talk about your relationship with Jason, and we'll get to that after we overview a little bit both of your individual roles as barmen, because I think that these are key components to how we got to where we are in the craft cocktail scene in Western New York right now, and probably will parlay into where we are in the future as well. So we're going to do a little storytelling here. So anybody who's interested should know that Jon Karel has at least one or two podcasts on BuffaloEats.org from a few years ago when you were at Vera.
Absolutely.
That have sort of your whole story, including your rise to rock and roll stardom and your eventual, I know you hate it when I say that, and your eventual choice to live in Buffalo based on the type of people that are here and the cost of living. Absolutely. And what you saw potential for. Can we just start it there, if you wouldn't mind, and just share with me a little bit about the process that took you from being a bouncer, I think, at Faraday's?
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Toro
I
to
see
where you are
I see
today.
where you're going with this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I won't bore everybody with the total,
it's not boring.
Autobiography, but yeah, I came to Buffalo in 2010 from Nyack, New York, in Rockland County, which is about 25 minutes northwest of the Bronx. I had been playing drums for a living at the time, and that was my career. But I'd always been off and on back to work at my hometown bar, the best bar in my town, in my opinion, which was Olive's, owned by Marianne Olive, a true mentor to me in my formative years. I had bar backed, bounced, line cooked, tended bar, every position available in that bar over the course of about 9 years before I ever moved to Buffalo. And at that bar was more of a shot of beer musician hangout bar.
And can I interrupt? Was that in between touring with
absolutely
a band called Horse and the Number 12 Looks Like
in
You?
between playing drums for Horse the Band.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
No, so fine, Number 12 Looks Like You, other studio projects and jamming at home and stuff. I would always come back from the road and want to go back to work at the bar. I've always been a service industry guy. I think my early service industry jobs, age 14, 15, always in pizza restaurants, washing dishes, mopping floors, eventually delivery guy, eventually pie man. I think I sort of always knew I was destined for the service industry. But anyway, I came to Buffalo 2010, and Donnie Clutterbuck actually gave me my first bar job.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Donnie Clutterbuck had remembered me from popping through on tour, and the bouncer he had hired for that night's shift, a guy named Dustin, got too high and didn't want to come into work because he was sitting at home freaking out.
I'm sure Dustin appreciates that you're talking about that right now.
That's no last names here. Dustin, wherever you are, you know it's true. he got too high and he couldn't do his shift. He was like, man, you got to cover me, bro. And I showed up and I said, hey, I'm John. I'm new in town. I'm here to work. He's like, what happened to the other guy? I'm like, oh, he's not feeling too good today. So I volunteered to take a shift. And that was it. And everything actually really started with the end of that shift. Donnie saying, I had a really nice time working with you tonight. And I think I'd like to keep you around here. So that was really my first big break in the Buffalo bar community, which is a tight-knit community here. And resumes don't do anything for employment in bar scene here. You have to know someone and have a way in. A bar position in Buffalo, New York is a very valuable high-income position.
Well, at a good bar.
Especially at the better the bar. And it's not, even divier places like Faraday, it's tough to get in there if you don't know people. So that was a big break for me, actually.
And so from there, met Cameron.
Mm-hmm. Inevitably, I formed a really tight friendship with Cameron Rector, who was at the time one of the head bartenders at Toro. Which is
a sister restaurant, or was at least a sister restaurant to Farady's by Nicholas
Katridis. Yep.
Right.
And through meeting Cameron and working with him as a door guy / barback at quote unquote what we affectionately nicknamed Club Toro on Saturday nights.
Yeah.
It was a great era of Buffalo history. For those of you that missed it, I'm sorry. It's gone. It's never coming back. But Steve K DJing, Cameron Rector and Carla Court behind the bar, me at the door, and just an incredible, weird, dancey Saturday night situation that had its real glory days for about a year and a half. Through that, and Cameron's sort of his trajectory launched from there, and he decided to open Vera Pizzeria with his two partners at that time, and invited me along for the ride and said, you're a real hardworking dude. I'd like you to design a drink program for my new restaurant, which is going to be a pizzeria on Lexington Ave. So that was the opening of Vera, was the beginning of my experience of professionally doing craft cocktails. And I guess coincidentally, I don't know if I would credit myself as being the impetus for craft cocktails happening in Buffalo, but I would. But I would say if there was a tipping point, and if it was sort of getting to a place where it was going to happen, opening that and getting to design that bar program, that was the tipping point that pushed it fully over.
No surprise you're throwing a little Malcolm Gladwell in there. John, I think that the important transition here is the moment that you realized that there was an option besides a plastic cup sort of shot and a beer kind of bar option, right?
So with every major decision or event in my life, I sort of have a habit of polling friends and family and just getting other people's input and trying to sort of decide how to progress into new territory. So I obviously called one of my old best friend bartenders from Olive's from the old days in Nyack, Monica Olive, who was now in Los Angeles working at a whiskey bar called the Thirsty Crow. Mm-hmm. And I said, Monica, I've been offered a position as a bar manager. I'm not even. I accepted it obviously, but I'm not even sure I know what that fully means. What am I getting into now? And she was like, oh, well, I work at this great bar, and we do classic drinks here. We're a whiskey bar. We specialize on Manhattans and Sazeracs and old timey time drinks. Check out Dale DeGroff. Check out Dave Wondrich. And oh yeah, man, you're gonna be great. This is that job's got you written all over. Good luck. God bless. Love you. Wish me luck. That was a tremendous help. I mean, she really started me in a knowledge base direction that was really helpful. The irony is when I started really making more sophisticated cocktails
at home in practice for this,
and also on my bar shifts at Farady's.
Right.
So for a good solid 6 to 8 months, you could walk into Farady's and get a really, really elegantly crafted Manhattan cocktail in a Yarai mixing glass with a Cocktail Kingdom Japanese bar spoon. and if you look at my Facebook, if you go back a few years, you'll see actually one that my friend Jason LoGrasso over here posted of me, and he was like, craft cocktails happening in Buffalo, in my hometown, Buffalo, New York.
At Farady's.
At Farady's.
Holy shit. So how did you meet Jason? Jason, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah. Well, the actual term that I used to describe the cocktail that you were stirring in that picture was proper, for the record.
Wow. How about that?
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
So proper cocktails
Proper
in Buffalo.
cocktails in Buffalo.
Go figure. Did you know that, John?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
I just sort of was looking back on Facebook, and I was like, it just, that's what it was. And I was like, now he's got Buffalo proper, and it just all kind of makes sense.
So now-
before you transition into talking about how you guys met each other, I just want to briefly go over Jason's sort of career. Is that an appropriate time for this?
Absolutely. So
John?
that's sort of my backstory leading up to this this incredible meeting. So now let's get some of Jay to understand
Jason,
his
you're
context.
Originally from Buffalo,
Correct.
And in 2005, you went to San Francisco on a visit,
Right.
and you were there for what, like a week or something?
Yeah, probably about a week.
And you were hooked.
Yeah,
it's hard not to be.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a long-term sort of old friend had moved there, and she was out there for about a year, and I visited, and there were so many things about the restaurant and bar culture that I didn't understand.
Well, that seemed foreign to somebody who grew up in Buffalo,
of course,
right?
So as soon as I got back, I was planning my next trip. At some point, it occurred to me, like, why not make your next trip more of a life choice? Yeah, a move.
And what were you tending bar or working in restaurants at that point here in Buffalo?
I was waiting tables.
And how old were you?
Let's see, 25.
Okay.
25. But basically my sort of passion for food and drink began way before that. I used to sort of my grandfather had a really kind of cute 60s bar set up in his basement, and I used to go back there and play bartender. And I can remember probably in the late 90s when the Food Network was in its infancy, seeing Del DeGroff make a cosmopolitan with actual lime juice and this flamed orange peel, and
kind of blew your mind.
It blew my mind. And at that point, I wasn't even 21 yet, so my sketch order for whoever was supplying me with my booze was like Cointreau and Kettle One vodka, and it was like, all right,
Taste
so
of limes and oranges.
some orange, and so
and everyone else was drinking garbage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that I would say at that point, cooking was more of a precedent for me.
Okay.
So I was sort of the young guy, 19, 20 years old, that was inviting my landscaping buddies or my high school pals over, and making like an octopus stew or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was like that was really what I was doing with my free time.
Nice. So you moved to San Francisco, and how long did it take you to land? You started waiting tables, right? And I think you started waiting tables at Coco 500.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that right?
That's right. Coco 500. Who at the time, unbeknownst to me, was one of the handful of places in San Francisco that was really doing exceptional things behind the bar. I wanted to be there because I sort of researched the background of the chef there, Loretta Keller, who was who is a genius, and at the time was very much at the very forefront of sort of slow food movement, and
Which was really in its height in 2005 in America.
right.
The conversation about slow food. I mean, I
Right,
was a
that's
slow
kind of
food
where-
member, and we had a slow food chat. I mean, like that was a big deal in 2005.
It was kind of just beginning, and I kind of stumbled on that place. I had set aside a stipend for myself to enjoy restaurants, to kind of figure out what kind of place would suit me to work in. And
How
apparently,
very wise of you.
yeah. Apparently,
That's good advice for all you aspiring.
Yeah, right?
the bartender at the time, Scott Baird, who is now one of the arguably most well known and successful, influential barmen in the country. They have a very successful bar in Trick Dog and Bon Vivants as a consulting group.
Trick Dog won this previous year's Tales of the Cocktail
Right.
Barroom Brawl Best Bar in America. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was doing some really creative things behind the bar, which without a reservation on a whatever, probably weekend night in San Francisco, that
where
was
you
our
eat.
spot.
Yeah.
We ate at the bar, and he was doing, some very creative and things that I had never seen. And apparently, I had just been asking the right questions, and we definitely ordered well. I remember
Such a tell.
bone marrow being on the menu, and he was like, well, so what's your story? And kind of told him that I was new in town, and he said, well, come back with a resume. So
Nice.
that's what I did, and
Right place, right time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you studied under him and worked beside him for how long before he kind of unleashed you on your own shifts?
Well, I took a job, running food and waiting tables there. I was mostly a lunch guy,
That's where they start all the new people.
Exactly. Well, back home in Buffalo, it was a big deal. I got all the good shifts and made all the money. And I got to San Francisco, and I was, I'd never heard
Low
of,
man on the totem pole.
yeah, any of these, crazy Italian wines or any of this stuff. So it was very humbling, but I was grateful for the opportunity. And I think the opportunity to be behind the bar finally came when Scott himself wanted to take a little vacation. And he sort of identified me as the one that might translate best as a bartender, even though I wasn't even, really permitted to wait tables at night. He said, no, that's our guy. That's our guy.
He really did want to go on vacation.
I think so. Because I certainly didn't have the chops to be behind that bar at that point. But yeah, the learning curve was fast, and he was a very, very patient teacher, so that helped a lot.
And so you went from there. How long were you there before? And then did you go on to Bourbon and Branch next?
Well, from Cocoa 500, I was there for, I don't know, maybe a little under 2 years, a year and a half, something like that. And there was an opening in Oakland at Flora, which another great barman, Eric Adkins, put together. So I had the opportunity to take a couple of shifts there. And soon thereafter, a place, Beretta, opened. And, these were both more sort of drink-heavy places. Cocoa 500 was a very dining destination, and, I was, very eager to sort of work a little bit harder and faster and sort of up my game. So these were places that were sort of suited to that. So shortly after Cocoa 500, I ended up splitting time between the Alembic on Haight Street and Beretta in the Mission, which were two of the premier cocktail programs of their time.
And Jay, you had mentioned to me earlier today that at that time, only 4 or 5 years ago, there was approximately the same amount of craft cocktail programs in San Francisco that there are now currently in Buffalo.
Oh, so like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Max.
That were really serious.
Really?
Bar programs.
When I landed at Cocoa 500, there was maybe 5, half a dozen places. There was.
Now there's probably over 100.
Yeah,
right.
So that was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
really?
About 10 years ago.
Wow.
Which is interesting to sort of put it in perspective of where we're at and how we're seeing so much
growth and embracing of the whole $10 cocktail and the well-made cocktail, which we'll talk a little bit more in a minute.
Continue.
So so at some point here you went on. I mean, you've just had a pretty storied career
already.
Really,
yeah,
actually.
Sure.
I mean, so you've worked at several other very well-respected cocktail bars, and I know that when I was looking up press on you, I found things on the San Francisco Gate. I found stuff on Grub Street and Eater, and at one point I think. Let's see. They were talking about when you when Rich Table opened, it had already received like ridiculous amounts of positive
the bar
reviews and criticism, and then they released a press release where they reported that they were going to quote unquote up their game by hiring you.
Right.
So that's a sign right there of sort of how esteemed you were among the community in terms of what you could bring to an already successful, relatively new restaurant.
And I'd like to side note that you are one of the most humble. Considering your resume, you're one of the most humble dudes.
So I'm not going to get him to brag about himself, is what you're telling me, Jon Karel?
He'll tell you, but he's not a name dropper.
Look, he's turning red. He's turning red. So you went on, and were you were at Quince, and is it Catonia?
Yes. Catonia. That's correct. That was sort of intertwined. Let's see. So I sort of took that cocktail route with Alembic and Beretta, Bourbon and Branch, Rick House, and then there's the people from Quince kind of came in and sort of surveyed my situation.
They headhunted you.
Yeah, at Bourbon and Branch, and I sort of took the leap into fine dining, actual fine dining. I mean, San Francisco, all the restaurants are very service forward. There's a lot of emphasis on, just technique and vocabulary and things like that. But we
could learn those things here.
This was the big leagues, Quince.
Yeah.
And I think their plan for me was to sort of come in, see how I fit in, take over the bar that Scott Baird kind of set up,
Right.
and take that over, and then create the upcoming Catonia bar, which was under construction. So I did fine dining for about 6 months, and then Catonia, which was a little more T-shirt, a little more, just a little more
Rough and ready.
Yeah, it was rough and ready. The food was different. The vibe was different. Definitely more suited for my personality, but learned a lot of very technical aspects. Doing the fine dining.
And how long were you there?
At Quince? Well, I was with that group for almost 3 years.
Okay, a long time.
Yeah. It was, they were just always striving for something better, which for me was just hallmark. It was like, well, once you get to a certain level and you feel like you don't have much to learn from yourself, there was always somebody there pushing.
That's huge.
Which was good.
It's boring otherwise.
It is.
If you're not learning new things, It's really boring. And so from there?
From there, another similar thing happened. The Rich Table folks had a pop-up at Catonia, and on their prep day, I was behind the bar, and so they were sat in front of me, and I was just kind of chatting with them and sort of working up some new cocktails with them, and we sort of broached the subject of potentially, helping out, but they were a startup restaurant, Kickstarter. So they didn't really have a big budget. They weren't going to pay consulting money. So they got going on their own, and, they were doing well. And it got to the point where, they wanted a little more performance from their bar. So they approached me, and 3 years is a good amount of time for a restaurant, I think, to spend with a group. So I was ready to kind of try something new. So that was essentially my last gig in San Francisco. That went on for about a year as well. And then I kind of took a little break, did some more like sort of party bar atmosphere type things, and actually went up with some friends in Napa and learned to butcher.
And this is through the Fatted Calf,
The Fatted Calf, yeah. So that's the long and the short of it.
Okay.
And then most recently, I spent some time, doing bartending in New York City, and then did a little project in Connecticut, and now we're here.
And
we're
you're
in
hanging
Buffalo.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you two met each other and where that went to.
So I think at the time that you and I met, you were probably just done with Catonia or still at Catonia?
At that time, I think I was.
That would have been,
yeah, I was still at Catonia. Yeah, absolutely.
in sort of late 2011. Mm-hmm. You had come home to visit with your folks. John Miro, the owner of HOD Tattoo, was tattooing a chicken wing on your leg, possibly, or
No. The chicken wing was I had to convince somebody in San Francisco to do that. It just seemed awkward here. It was sort of a serendipitous confluence of events that led us to meet, I would say.
I
had
our mutual tattooer definitely made this.
Well, I was in town for a friend's wedding. I was standing in his wedding, but the only way to get me that time was to have a required surgery, an abdominal surgery, but at an elective time. So it was like, yeah, I'm going to have that surgery, but I'm going to have it this time so I can be at the wedding 2 days later. So the first 3 days of that Buffalo trip are a little bit foggy. I was very heavily medicated. Yeah. But yeah, every time I'm in Buffalo, I make it a point to head down to HOD and sit with my friend John. And, he said, that's right. You do bartend mixology stuff. You got to meet my friend. So that's basically, he just said, here's his number, or you could just show up at Fairdy's, I think. And
so this was before Vera opened?
Yes. And this is probably in the final month before we opened Vera. So I have been working towards this bar program for the previous 6 months, and developing a menu and sort of scatterbrain and all over the place and trying to get stuff together to launch this bar program in a restaurant. And I really wanted to nail it. I really wanted to come out of the gate swinging. And so then John Miro is like, yeah, my buddy, he's doing all that stuff on the West Coast. You guys should hang out and have a beer. So I immediately call him. I say, well, if you're in town, I'd love to buy a beer. We met over at Kohl's. And had a burger and a beer, And me, I just was like, well, so what do you do with this? And how do you do with this? And how do you do, free pour versus jigger? And how do you handle eggs? And how long will lime juice stay? And how do I order, how do I get, a good relationship going with my reps and my liquor salesman, but also make sure that I'm not getting screwed around. I don't want to
questions that it was better to have a person you knew and could trust rather than like randomly trying to Google the answers to
People
it.
got to understand that in Buffalo, New York, if you want to be a cook, there's plenty of great restaurants to stage at and to say, hey, I'd like to work for free and spend a few days and sort of around experienced, older, cooler guys that have been in it to win it. At that time, especially, and only now just a little bit starting, there was nowhere to stage for me. There was nowhere. All I wanted to do at that point, all I wanted was a mentor. Anybody to come in and say, well, hey, I'll tell you what, work on the line with us for a few nights and you'll get an idea of sort of how a busy service behind a craft bar works. There was nothing. There was no, and I had plenty of experience at bars and working in bars, but never with all fresh ingredients and
trying to deal with the juice program and everything else. That's a massive
It's a massive undertaking. The logistical side of running a craft beverage program versus running a typical turn and burn like nightclub operation, the logistical difference in terms of how to order, the typical bar in Buffalo or typical bowling alley bar orders from like one purveyor. We have like 16 or 17 that we get liquor from.
Right.
The typical preparatory duty means putting ice in a well, taking the caps off the pour spouts, and you're open. Like a craft bar, it's about 5 hours to get ready for a service.
Right.
I had 1,000,001 questions, and then this guy falls into my lap and says, yeah, man, I'll meet you for a beer over at Kohl's. And so I'm like, and we start going, and I start asking questions, and he's got an answer for every question.
Jason, what did you think about this young upstart who clearly was eager but didn't know what he was talking about?
I thought it was great. I remember, stopping into Farady's and him making a couple of cocktails, albeit with good technique, but cocktails that I think he wouldn't be offended at this point that I would say were rather unmemorable.
Earnest.
Yeah. But he was, I had to give him credit because he was trying his hardest and he had a smile on his face and he was working with absolutely nothing.
Farady's isn't exactly
this is not
stocked with the freshest of ingredients.
Exactly.
And the
So any
of
these bitters or tools that he was, going with is stuff that he, on his own time brought in. And I can remember the point where it clicked for me that this guy was like that he was a genius was when he sort of was out of cocktail ideas, and I was probably 3 sheets at that point anyways, and he put a San Francisco brewed Anchor steam beer in front of me, added a couple of dashes of bitters, and called it a full house. And he essentially recreated Anchor Christmas Ale,
right?
out of nothing. And I was like, all right, this guy's
he's got a clue.
This is what happens when creative people who have nothing to work with. This is the sort of this is what happens.
Right.
Like you just make it work.
Huh. Have you ever told him that story before?
Vaguely.
John's shaking his head. He's like, totally embarrassed.
I promised him to one day put that cocktail on a menu in San Francisco, which, given the places I worked,
I remember well. And for the sake
Yeah.
for the sake of accuracy, I think it needs to be stated that you actually named it the Full House. You were like, well, what about old John Stamos and
No, you were 3 sheets.
yeah.
and it needs to be mentioned that Jay is exceptionally talented at naming cocktails. You always appeal to my sense of humor, which is ironic bad puns and weird pop culture references.
So over the time that you were still at Vera, when you would come back and visit, what was your take on that whole situation, Jason?
Right. So then, flash forward from Farady's to then, I think the first time we invited Jay to come guest spot. Then you're walking into like a fully functioning craft bar program. That must have been a little like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was interesting. I was just beyond excited that somebody had finally put into fruition sort of the dream that I would often on have being out there in California, but sort of not really wanting to come back and do myself. Like it's always been there. So I was just completely floored that somebody had actually done it and done it well. And
I've always had a question actually that I want to ask you.
Oh, nice.
Because and Christa and I probably bond more about this, about the music business or other things, but there's always that thing of like, culturally we kill the things we love. Like when, was there ever a part of you that was like, great, this whole craft cocktail thing, now there's
one in Buffalo. God damn it.
Now there's one in Buffalo with Edison bulbs.
The
and
shark has been jumped.
Yeah, exactly. Like, was there ever a part of you that was like, wow, okay, like what was sort of a precious, more artisanal thing is getting more mainstream, and you can feel that by going back to sort of a more secondary, tertiary market. Was there ever a part of you that rolled your eyes at what we were doing, or were you always supportive and thought it was cool?
No, I definitely 100% honestly have always just been in support of that because, it's something that just, it didn't exist here. And it was just so refreshing to see that had caught on. It's one of those industries that you can really watch grow. I mean, you can feel the pulse of it. So you just knew it was going to happen somewhere else. It started to happen outside of San Francisco. It went to Oakland, and then you hear about this place in Orinda or something that's got like a seasoned bar guy, and you're like, oh, how far is this going to spread? And it got to Buffalo, and I really just thought that was the greatest thing. I finally had a place to go where there were no TVs or Labatt blue lights or plastic cups. It was a dream come true for me.
So
really,
I have a couple questions before we transition into a bigger talk about the scene as a whole. Yeah. What was sort of your opinion of? I mean, there was a lot of controversy when Vera first opened because Buffalo is very thrifty, but we're a big drinking town.
Sure.
I was convinced that there were people. I know there are people out there who will happily pay $12 for a decent glass of wine. So I was convinced that you guys would be fine. That there would be people who would be more than happy to pay $10 for a drink. And honestly, I mean, I remember during the whole swing thing in like '97, I used to pay $10 for an extra dirty Kettle One martini. So I thought, like, what the hell's the difference? But it caused a huge amount of drama.
To this day, even at Buffalo proper, my current restaurant, to this day, we will still get plenty of nasty Yelp reviews about the pricing structure of our beverage program. But the bar's still full every night.
Yeah, so, it sure is.
So it's people will still complain, but we're certainly not. It's not alienating people enough to stop them from coming. And then once they, the people that are complaining about $10 are also the same people drinking, Barton's gin and soda gun tonic for $3.50, 2-for-1 happy hours. It doesn't take long, even for the most skeptical consumer, to taste a few drinks and be like, oh, okay, I get it. No, this is actually wonderful.
But Jason, did you at any point think like, I don't know if Buffalo's going to go for this? I mean, we are definitely a place that likes
compared
to
to San Francisco prices
on a Friday.
Yeah. I mean, John and I definitely talked about that, and I think one of his, kind of interestingly, was one of his primary concerns was like fill levels on glass, on glassware. And I was like, oh, no, don't worry about it. But also, on the other hand, San Franciscans have had a hard time paying $10 or $12 for a cocktail in San Francisco.
Right.
Michael Bauer, who was the major food writer there, was, sort of like at this precipice when he finally saw the $12 cocktail, and he was kind of, losing his poop about it. And
you're being so polite.
And it was, it's like, hey, New York, gin and tonic, $14 easily. Easy.
Yeah.
You go cocktails. You're looking at $18, $20.
Yeah, no, in Toronto that's how much they are too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but what's the exchange rate now?
Well, but that was before the exchange rate.
Exactly.
I mean, the exchange rate's really good right now. Yeah. But 3-4 years ago, when I used to go up there, it'd be an $18 cocktail in a 4 or 5 ounce coupe glass.
Yeah.
And the exchange rate was pretty even. So I mean, it's big city prices. I think $10 for the size of the cocktails that you get at Vera or Buffalo proper or whatever, and the fact that they're straight booze and fresh juice makes perfect sense to me.
I mean, you can't really go much lower and have any success as a restaurateur or bar operator. They're just
not with the juice program and the amount of shelf you gotta have.
I mean, anybody can sell $7 swag cocktails. I mean, that's no problem. This country's been at that game for half a century or more now.
Right.
But it's I mean, it's great to see Buffalo picking up on it, and that these places are busy every night, which I've seen since I've been here. And yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that San Francisco had a problem with $10 and $12 cocktails too. So it's that's a big city.
I'll tell you another
with big
interesting
money
factor of that.
Yeah.
Is now there's escalation happening. So now, at the same time that bars are producing better quality products, consumer awareness of brands is expanding.
Sure.
So now, when 3 years ago it might have been okay to pour someone a old granddad bourbon old fashioned, now you get more and more people like, OGD, come on, you could do better than that. How about, why don't you guys have this in the well, or why don't you guys use this?
Right.
And so now there's an escalation happening where, to make your pour costs on certain beverages, especially like an old fashioned, which is 2.5 ounces of whiskey per drink. Now we're getting into really interesting territory, because it's not long before we're going to have to go up to $12 for these drinks in order to stay at, I don't know if people are aware, but industry standard for bar pour cost, beverage cost is 18%. Most craft programs that I've ever run have had to bottom out at 25%. There's no way really to go lower than that and have better than a 75% margin and still pour quality. So as people's demands for more impressive base
better
spirits,
quality,
because their knowledge is growing, the consumer is actually going to end up driving the cost up a tad. I don't necessarily think that's such a bad thing, because what they're going to get is see better and better and better. But it's important to identify the difference between, well, if I pay $15 for Manhattan in Manhattan, $15 I think is a fair price for Rittenhouse rye whiskey and Budapest vermouth, and I think and the skill, you're also paying for the skill of a barman to, as I like to say, not fuck up your Manhattan, because it happens all the time.
Oh yeah, it does.
But when you walk into certain Manhattan bars and you order the same drink and it's like $22 plus tax, then you're like, all right, now you're just gouging me.
Right.
We got to get to a place in this city where there's a good amount of trust going on between consumer and producer, that nobody's trying to swindle anybody and nobody's trying to gouge. And that, if people are requesting, now that their knowledge of, whiskeys and gins and vodkas, tequilas is expanding, somebody has to take care of that cost. And, but they're, a good bar program will earn that trust with its patrons.
So, and I want to talk a little bit about earning trust with patrons, but the first thing I want to do is kind of find out from Jason. Now, I don't know how many times you've come back in the last couple of years to visit, but I mean, you've been here for a month or something. You're here for a month or something now, right?
Yeah,
so you've been around. You've been probably. Tell me all the places you've been.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah,
so you've checked out bar programs at most of the major players in town.
Yep.
And what is sort of your? I mean, you don't have to talk about any one particularly, but like as far as the lay of the land goes, how are we doing?
I think things are going well. There's a couple of places that I've been that are very successful, and they're doing cocktails, but I think what makes them successful is having an option for people who aren't necessarily there for that. If you can get a $3 can of Pabst, whether or not you're a hipster, maybe you're an 80-year-old,
yes.
And the environment there is and the staff is warm and inviting, and not overly pretentious, then you're good. And that's a lot of what I've seen is a very sort of mixed bag of patrons at these places, which is great because that's what you want. Do you want to be exclusive? Sure, to yourself, but I mean, you want to make yourself available and enjoyable to
accessible.
Everyone, and that's what seems like it's happening here, which is a very good sign.
And I'm curious as to whether or not, I want to talk a little bit about the pretension factor. I read a piece where you said that you hate the word mixologist, like that you find that you don't have a degree, like it's not like a title you earn like a doctorate or whatever, and that you consider yourself a barman. And that's a conversation John and I have had before. And I would say that one of the things that has made craft cocktails successful in Buffalo is the idea of, and John and I, we've talked about this 100 times, removing the monocle and the staring down the nose and maintaining this super friendly, willing to educate, willing to talk to the customer without being degrading sort of way in terms of presenting an open-armed scenario for somebody unfamiliar with craft cocktails. Can both of you talk a little bit about why that works in Buffalo? Maybe it doesn't work in San Francisco. Maybe you do need more of a monocle in San Francisco.
I
have
think
no
the truth
idea.
is every city has reached an apex where they had to rein it in a little bit, and I think every city has. When you first come out guns blazing and it first hits the market, everybody goes through a little bit of that feeling of feeling supercilious, and or that their position. Mixologist is not necessarily a term that I hate at all. Mixology as a word, a phrase coined in the 1850s, doesn't bother me as a term. It's more when people try to really differentiate your societal sort of, or like make it like
it's
a class
thing.
Yeah, and that just feels like it's like, oh, dude, don't put me on that pedestal. If you want to say, hey, this is a great bartender, That works for me, but don't be like, oh, you're not a bartender, you're like a mixologist, and it's like all right, it's okay. I mean, but there's again, yeah, it's not an earned title like chef, like executive
or
chef,
like sommelier,
which is a much more
structured
thing. So there's an obvious reason to resist the term, but in general, as a word, mixology doesn't bother me. I mean, it's not like a naughty or there's not a taboo word.
Right. Naughty. Did you say naughty?
You know what I mean. But yeah, Jay, one question I would ask.
Hates the word mixologist.
Yeah, I just don't like it.
Yeah.
Because it sounds so square, right?
Yeah, it irks me.
I mean, it's like the word hipster, though. Like, hipster is a term from the 1950s Harlem, New York, describing people that showed up at all the cool jazz clubs and were
the hep cats.
The really hep cats that were in on the scene. Like, now that hipster has been ascribed as a new blanket derogatory term to describe to anybody with tattoos or that list
facial hair
that, and also in a way that is derogatory and basically saying that you have tattoos, you have facial hair, and you're a pretentious douchebag.
Right.
These terms, love them or hate them, they have different meanings over time. The words themselves don't really get me, but it's tough. It's tough, and I think. I was just reading a blog. I wish I could remember the term. It was on Uber Bar Tools, and they were talking about we need a new term, and we need a certification program, and we need to, like sommelier, we need a sort of new term because mixologist ain't cutting it. It's not.
Right.
It's not a term that any of us want to be hoisted upon ourselves. It's and it's not one that really accurately conveys what we do. I don't mean to backtrack at all, but I want to piggyback on something you said, because you said and asked Jay a question. She was asking, in your opinion, how are we doing? What's the state of the from an outsider's perspective? As somebody who grew up here, as somebody who's extremely experienced as you are, from an outsider's perspective, how do you think we're doing in terms of ever being able to truly offer like a Buffalo style of drink making to the world? Like, when somebody makes me a cocktail in Manhattan, there's certain flavor profiles and certain attitudes that I'm always like, oh, that's so New York City. When I go to Toronto, there's, especially because they're limited access to booze and how much they've been forced to be creative with house ingredients. When you go to Toronto, there's such a clear, that Portland cocktail thing,
you're talking about not just terroir in terms
not
of
only
what's
terroir in terms of
imparted
what's
through the actual base ingredients, but sort of an attitudinal, citywide attitudinal thing that happens either because it's forced on you or because it's people have all trained under the same handful of folks,
or just truly a scene of bartenders that develop their own sort of voice or sound
repartee.
Repartee. Not just the terroir of what's available, but I guess in your opinion, my biggest dream is that we eventually here in Buffalo will have that vibe. Do you think that we are any closer than when you first met me? Do you think we're any closer to having sort of like a Buffalo style of making cocktails? Or do you think it's still mostly people being very heavily influenced by the books authored by big city bartenders in other markets?
Yeah, I think there's a Buffalo style happening here. I think it's, I think there's a nice balance of showmanship and nonchalance.
That's very Buffalo too.
Yeah,
in and of itself, right?
Yeah, it's people here are not, to my opinion or observation taking themselves too seriously. Guys will dress up, they'll do a cool haircut. But at the end of the day, it really just looks like they're having fun behind the bar. Do see some cell phones behind the bar, so a little polish there might be good. But other than that, I think it's taking on a personality of its own.
I think it's interesting, John, because you and I have never talked about that before, but like my biggest thing is for Buffalo to have, for Western New York to have a terroir, right? A discernible flavor, which we're working on. And it's challenging because even the people who are growing food and making wine in this community or brewing beer aren't certain what that is yet. Yeah. So it's sort of this, unattainable thing that we're all searching for. But it's interesting because I never thought about that sort of style thing, and that idea of sort of this like kind of showman / nonchalance is really fascinating to me. I love that.
My hope is that on a long enough timeline that the flavor of Buffalo mixed of cocktails in Buffalo will take on a personality that, obviously there's always going to be individual bartenders within a scene that really stand out and have a very unique, sort of what they do. But yeah, I mean, if when somebody mixes a drink for me now at a bar, I can almost immediately tell which issue of Imbibe or which book they were reading that weekend on the toilet. That directly led to this very, very, there are certain things that are just so West Coast and certain things that are so East Coast, and I'm hoping, sort of, it's my own pipe dream that eventually people in Portland or San Francisco or wherever will be like, this is sort of one of those Buffalo style cocktails. It's got that Buffalo thing on it.
It's really interesting though, because if you think about it, like Tim Stevens from Buffalo, but like really trained,
San
knows
Diego
stuff from
style though. Yeah,
San Diego, right? Mm-hmm. And Tony Riles, who's really got this very hybrid, esoteric, kind of very strange, sort of 11 Madison Park kind of thing going on. And then your style,
but almost Asian. I mean, when I taste Tony's
there
drinks,
is a lot of Asian.
I feel like
there
a heavy, like almost Japanese, like. Vibe in his mixing.
I get that. And then people who kind of like came up at Vera when you were there, and the people who've come up under you at Revelry and have moved here to Buffalo now to be at Proper have their own sort of vibe. And then the second crew, which is the crew that's happened at Vera in your absence, has their own thing going on, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we get 5 years down the road and people have worked for more than one of you guys and have brought their own unique background and interests and history and training, and sort of see where all of that goes. I mean, it's a very exciting thing.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about that really happening for us as a city, food and beverage. I'm just really like,
for sure,
really having our own sort of like hang. I mean, every city, New York City is one of the food capitals of the universe, and still it's like pizza and bagels is what they're known for.
It's
Buffalo,
true.
Buffalo's a great food city, but wings. Somebody, I read online, somebody was all butthurt and upset that we got 10 food destinations in the world because of our wing. It's awesome. It's cool. Yeah. Chicago, Grand Rapids is there, but deep dish pizza is what people know Chicago for.
Right.
There's nothing bad about that. Anything that promotes excitement or enthusiasm about the food of a culture, it does feel a little like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
It does,
in terms of perception, but
some attention is better than no attention, as far as I'm concerned.
And I don't mind that the locals are a little more privy to how cool we are than the tourists. That doesn't.
Oh, sure,
that's
absolutely.
There's something kind of cool about that.
I think
still.
Another interesting thing, and I want to do a little consumer takeaway here at the end. But the first thing I want to mention to you, John, is you and I were having a conversation in the very brisk and chilly weather outside Buffalo proper one night, where you were talking about how you had sort of had this moment where you realized that like the movers and shakers in New York City were really like 25 people.
Oh boy.
Like 25 people in New York City are the ones who are really making things happen in terms of bars or restaurants or like what's going on there.
Well, to take it back full circle to Jay and I and our Kismet and just how instrumental you were to me getting into the management of bars and the cultivating of craft cocktail knowledge. I got real lucky there. There was, like I said, there was nowhere to stage. There was nobody for me to apprentice with. And I still, to this day, I'm still addressing holes and flaws in my technique and bad habits that I got as a bartender and a craft bartender now that I didn't have anybody to error correct me in my youth at this. So I'm still making corrections and changes now, making up for some of the bad habits I had early on. But Jay, and I was laughing with you at the bar downstairs because you spent 2 or 3 days with me, but for me it was like that was 90% of the mentorship I got going into that. So I only completed my Bar Smarts Live stuff this past year. After 4 years of running bars. But so to get back to what you were just saying about about that process. I mean now we're in a unique and amazing position because and I look, I think it's just, again, it's kismet that you ended up being an expat and that it's sort of Buffalo coming back to Buffalo all the way full circle. But, we're now, we have enough that we can, there's more mentorship in the city. There's now going to be 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation
Right.
Apprentices and barmen and people that, probably started as a barback for me are going to end up owning their own incredible bars in the next couple years. Yeah, that's the dream. That's the hope. And, it's really amazing. It's something I take a tremendous amount of pride in, how sort of underdog and self-taught Buffalo is in general, but me also in this experience, it's been a lot of self-teaching, and Buffalo proper is my first time taking a crack at actual full-blown ownership.
Right.
So that's been quite a learning curve. I've said it many times. I think I had to open Buffalo proper just so I could finally have my ideal bartending job, and now I got it. And I had to bite a pretty big bullet to get my ideal bartending job, but now I got it. And now I work in my opinion, the coolest bar in the world.
And Jason, you'll be doing at least a guest bartending.
So
gig there,
so
right?
now that we've gotten to know
Let the
Jason a
man
little
talk.
bit, yeah.
Yeah, we've ironed it out. We've been sort of dodging the subject for a couple of weeks here, but next Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm going to be upstairs at Buffalo proper, featuring a small menu of
So that would be
cocktails.
Tuesday the 3rd and Wednesday the 4th. Okay, because this will go up on Wednesday, so people should come see you for your second night.
Perfect.
Very cool. So you'll be upstairs doing a small menu of your
His drinks,
stuff.
yes.
Right.
Nice. Very cool. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is a consumer takeaway. I have a big beef, and that is that when anything new comes to town, in terms of sort of a wave of an idea, is that there are a lot of people who make a stab at providing that idea in their existing establishment, but maybe don't always understand the depth of what that idea really is supposed to be. So my concern in the craft cocktail movement is that there are a lot of places that look like, smell like, cost like they have craft cocktails, but then there's marshmallow vodka on the drink list, or there's nobody actually measuring anything, or whatever. We could go on and on and on. And so what I want to understand is, if I didn't know anything about craft cocktails and I walked into a bar and I wanted to understand if this bar was a true craft cocktail bar, so that my experience would be an adequate measure of whether or not I enjoyed craft cocktails.
So
what are the
order
things
drink
I would
or order
look
shot
for?
and a beer.
Yeah.
Right. What are the things I want to look for? What are the tells of a good or a bad?
Well, I
version of a craft cocktail
I
bar?
think first of all, this is a global plague. It's not just this region that's experiencing this phenomenon. This is cocktails. Ever since probably like a Bar Smarts show or something like that made it on air. It's everybody wakes up in the morning and thinks, hey, I could pull this off, or
I
at
could
my
charge
restaurant.
$12 for cocktails.
Oh, look at this. This is easy.
Right.
They got some.
I mean, it
lemons up
reminds
there.
me of the martini craze of the 90s, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Chocolate, sugar.
Kill me now, please.
Everything martini.
Kool-Aid
everything
martinis.
bagel martini. Is that real? Can that happen?
Okay, so what are some tells? What are questions I can ask, or if I don't even know what a craft cocktail tastes like? What are questions I can ask? What are things I can look for?
Well, I have a very trained eye for this, so I could spot things from outside of the door.
Yes, I'm sure
you can look at the
Mr.
you can look at
LoGrasso.
the back bar. Are the bottles organized and grouped correctly? Are there neon pour spouts on all of them? So you might not be looking for that. You're probably enjoying your company at
Anything
that
built
point.
to be in a black light is probably a bad.
Yeah, that's a bad sign. I think for the the basic consumer, before you're going to be handed a menu, most likely, hopefully, before you actually like have an in-depth conversation with someone. So I would take a chance and or take an opportunity to look over that menu. Does it look like it was professionally done? Are there spelling errors? Are there capitalizations or not where there should be? Are there prices there? Are there not prices there? That's a pretty good indication of how much care they're going to put into your beverage. If you can't write a menu, you certainly probably can't make a drink. Also, while you're looking at that menu, if it seems overly saturated with brand names,
like Absolute or whatever,
just naming each and every brand on the cocktails is sort of a faux pas, I think now, because that sort of lends itself to the fact that maybe you had some external help.
Distributor, helped you make your cocktail
there
list.
Are a few reps.
We have that complaint with wine lists in town a lot.
There are a few reps nowadays that are savvy enough to help you design a menu, but you can be fully certain that they're not going to help execute or train or be there to.
And that means that your bartender's loyalty is more towards who hooked him up with product than your satisfaction and your deliciousness.
So that's a good set. That's a good thing to say.
Yeah, that's.
And for me, the tell is ice cubes. That's the biggest tell for me right away. Is like people can say they have a craft cocktail program, and if I haven't looked at the menu and I just walk in and order a Manhattan or an old fashioned or a Sazerac, right, which for me are like the tell drinks, the ice is a huge tell as to whether or not they're invested in making sure that my drink stays good from the time I start it to the time I finish it.
Yeah, for relatively the same cost and relatively the same size and amount of space that it takes up in your restaurant, both Cold Draft, KOLD, and Hoshizaki make a cuber machines.
We've written about them in Buffalo Spree.
Yeah, I used to recommend Cold Draft to everybody. I have twin Cold Drafts at Revelry in Rochester. They make great ice, but they're terrible machines, unfortunately.
In terms of breaking down all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I could be a Cold Draft certified repair technician at this point. The Hoshizaki cuber makes Cold Draft makes 1 1/4 all the way around. Hoshis make 1 inch by 1 1/4. Slightly smaller cube, but they are rich, dense ice that use filter. It has a built-in filter in the machine.
Nice.
It freezes from the bottom up. You will know a bar immediately by how they care about the one ingredient that's in every drink they make.
Right.
Ice, and ice has got to be taken seriously. Not just for serving and presentation, but also for chilling and diluting. The ice that you use to chill and dilute your drinks ends up playing a big role. There are certain bar programs that take this extremely far, and I'm not saying that.
Well, anybody you Google ice, it's kind of bananas.
Yeah,
I mean, there are people who are really going over the top.
If a bar tells you they use a Kleinbell and they order Kleinbell ice, which is that ice that ice sculptors buy to do sculptures, and those 300-pound blocks. I mean, that is nice ice and it's clear, but it's the eco footprint of the amount of energy production it takes
just to make the ice and ship it.
To make that ice is insane. I think the only guy I know in the city that's really doing it right and doing the hand cut in-house the way it should be done is Tony Riles.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he's got a crazy ice program going on right now.
Yeah,
he just showed me all of it when I was there a month ago.
Yeah, you have to freeze water in igloo coolers and walk-in freezers, and you have to be patient. You have to give them 2 days, and then once 2 days frozen, then you have to let them sit for a few hours to sort of relax out of the cooler, and then you have to hand carve that the whole way through. It's a lot of work, and it's really precious when it comes out, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. If you want to see that, go check him out at Bourbon and Butter. He's got it going on.
Cool.
But it's a very low.
So what are your tells besides ice, John?
Jumbo-sized glassware.
Okay.
That's an immediate tell of like
cheap booze.
I just there's no reason a human being should ever consume 16 ounces of daiquiri or whatever.
Or martini, unless you're at the airport, of course.
Unless you're at the airport.
It's completely acceptable to have that big balloon.
But, craft cocktails, I mean, it's no surprise to be served a 5-ounce coupe today.
People have to understand that a shaken cocktail, especially one that's been emulsified, is most delicious in the 3 to 5 minutes post crafting it. As it starts to warm up and lose its bubbles and lose its mouthfeel and lose everything special about it, the cocktail will taste shittier and shittier. So the idea is, we don't want too large of a beverage here in each serving.
Especially if it's got egg or I don't
There's
know.
a lot going on that
yeah.
the shaking, especially in the proper shaking technique, provides this beautiful effervescent, mouthfeel and look, and it literally after 3.5 minutes that starts to really die.
So if it's a big drink, you can't drink it in 3.5 minutes. It doesn't make sense.
So the idea of this 14-ounce martini glass, housing 12 to 13 ounces of cocktail, it's not only sort of irresponsible to serve somebody that much alcohol in one beverage and sort of asking for trouble in terms of overserving, but you're also guaranteeing that 50 to 60% of their sipping on this drink will taste like shit.
Right.
Well, it's like anything else, like coffee, for instance. You have a window of time in the morning when you have your coffee where it's most delicious.
Yes.
And then you step outside and you're in the car, and then all of a sudden it's
no good. Too cold, too watered down, too whatever.
Not wanted iced coffee or something. So
rule number 2, bigger is not always better.
Yeah, exactly. Don't order the
That's
extra
what she said.
large double. Maybe have you could a medium. So.
And your next tell. You got another tell for me?
Well, he already mentioned back bar organization, which is big. Yeah, it's very weird when everything's all willy-nilly. You want to see... My goal of going into a bar is not to try things that I've already had. My hope is that I'll try something new and interesting.
Right.
So back bar organization, I'd like to see all the Scotch whiskeys available grouped in one area because I want to look at something familiar and then look directly next to that bottle and say, ooh, I've never tried that.
Right, and it's very hard to do that when there's stuff everywhere.
When everything's all willy-nilly and there's no sense of care of categorizing the back bar, it's very challenging to gaze upon a bar and make ordering decisions based on that. What he said about menus, I really want to second that too. People have to remember that what's on the menu, those bartenders make hundreds and hundreds of at a time. They've really nailed that. You might want to stump your bartender and say, have you ever heard of a Corpse Survivor number 1? You might make your bartender feel kind of like a dick because he doesn't know it offhand and have to look it up, and you feel cool. But chances are, if you had just asked for Corpse Survivor number 2, it's something he makes all the time and is really freaking good at.
Right.
And if the goal is you getting a truly delicious drink, then that menu had a lot of thought and a lot of care over. It would be like asking a chef, I know you have this menu that you serve at the tables of food and stuff, but
Could you make something else?
Does your chef know how to make barbecue baby back ribs? And it's like, of course our chef can make baby back ribs, but like he's got this menu that he worked super hard on and he really cares about. Ordering off the menu is not an insult, but don't be afraid of cocktail menus. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm cheesy if I order off the cocktail menu. I'm like the normal vanilla everyday Joe Public.
Right.
And they want to give a bartender, a
They
challenge.
want to show off their knowledge or whatever.
So here's a good one. If as a consumer, if you want to cue to me that you know what's going on, you don't say, "Can you make a Sazerac?" to me. You say, "How's your Sazerac?"
Right.
And I've gotten that a few times. How's your Sazerac? I assume that you know how to make one, but what kind of rye do you use in yours?
Right.
And that might cue to me that, oh, okay, well, I have a more discerning palate. Big tells. Cell phone use behind a bar, that's a big no-no.
I hate that. I really hate it.
It drives me nuts.
I don't want to see a cell phone in a server's hand, in a waiter's hand, in a bartender's hand, ever.
Unless you're changing the music unless your cell phone is the designated iPod for the house. That's about the only pass you'll get from me. Let's see. Multiple pour spouts when a bar
has like 14 different kinds of pour spouts.
Especially
on
if
their
a bar
booth.
is a free pour bar and they're committed to not using jiggers. To see a lot of variable flow rates coming out of bottles is usually a dead giveaway of like, well, okay, this is weird.
They just bought whatever they ran into at the store and they're not caring. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to say TVs at bars are a mortal sin, but
The one at Vera plays like old movies in black and white.
Yeah, right.
It's different.
I'm going to say I hope people aren't going out to craft and cocktail bars to watch TV, but I'd like to, if you see news on, if you see violent sports in the wee hour, like MMA fights and stuff, you're probably not going to get a good drink at that bar.
Yeah.
I can almost guarantee you.
You took Jason by surprise with that one. That was funny.
It's good.
part of what's so great about great drinks is that they, they promote a romantic atmosphere and like violent sports or antithesis.
Violent sports, weird day glow, pour spouts, and bad ice.
For sure.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you so much. And you guys go out tonight and see Jason at the second floor bar at Buffalo Proper and say hi. And I'm sure he'll make you a fantastic drink. And thanks so much, you guys, for hanging out with me tonight.
Our
talking
pleasure.
about this.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. It's been great.
Thanks. Eat some of that cheese, goddammit.